welcome friends. We are back this week and we're happy you're here with us. So what do we want to talk about today?
You know, I was thinking about how things come to be in a conversation. Just simply, how do things come to be? And I think as far as these podcasts go, there are so many things that come that have not been prepared for. It's just because the inspiration happens between people. And before coming here, I was having this conversation, and I hadn't been thinking anything until a question was asked, and then I thought everything.
Okay.
And then this person said, "So why didn't you tell me this before?" And I was like, "Because you didn't ask me before." And I legitimately did not have the thought. The thought did not exist. And I think coming here into this podcast, it seems kind of like there's been this like vacuum of thoughts that have existed before this space.
Okay.
And so I'm excited for the things that don't exist yet to be born into place. And just before the podcast, Stetson came in and said, "I just finished Everything All Together All at..." How do you pronounce
Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Yeah,
the
I
movie.
just finished it. And he kind of shone a bit, and I'm excited to hear about that.
What did you think?
It was really good.
Very good.
Why?
Well, first off, it's rated R.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know anything
So is
about
the
it.
passion,
You
right?
saw it.
I possibly forgot that I saw it.
It's the one with the woman who's like getting brought back
Oh,
and forth
into
between
different
like
time
different
time experience
universes and her
dimensions
daughter.
Not
Okay.
promoting a rated R movie, but
Yeah, is
Okay.
this okay?
Okay.
Can
Yes!
we talk about this?
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
All right,
I
yeah.
think culture has changed.
All right. Okay, good. Well, I can't talk about it without spoiling it. So
So from a heart perspective,
I can't talk about it
Well,
without spoiling
then
it.
spoil it. Spoiler
Look,
alert.
if you haven't seen it, go ahead and pause right now and then
Watch
come
it,
back
come
after
back.
you watch.
Okay, well, so we talked a couple weeks ago about like when you have like a different lens of the gospel, like you see it other places, and I don't intentionally go looking for it; it just pops up. So it's a goofy movie, like it's odd and it's wild, and there's this woman who all of a sudden gets thrown into this story, and she's encountering herself in alternate universes, and there's like this whole storyline where like her daughter is also doing the same thing from a different universe, and she's trying to like, I don't know, like I need to watch it again, but it feels like she's trying to destroy everything, or maybe just herself, because she's reached this point where it's just kind of overwhelming for her. And so she's like, the woman, she's like up against all these like enemies and situations, and in the background is her husband, who is just portrayed as kind of like, I don't know, this very gentle, positive, but like
everything's gonna be okay, kind of. Yeah.
yeah, but also he doesn't like speak up for himself like a lot. Like in the beginning, he's trying to find the time to like give his wife divorce papers, and like she's too busy doing the taxes, and he doesn't want to bother her, and it's not the right time, and like all these different things. So there's all this fighting, and then it comes to this point where she reflects on, I forget exactly how it's shown, but I think there's like a flashback that shows is like, while all of this has been going on, he's been very deliberately
Yes.
being kind in these different ways and trying to disarm these situations. And he has this conversation with her, I think in an alternate universe, where he says, I think he said, I know that you feel like you're a fighter, and I am a fighter too. This is how I fight. And
it's with kindness.
It's through kindness
Yep.
and gentleness. And it kind of reaches this climactic point where like she's in this room with like all these people that are like trying to kill her, and in these like weird, goofy, creative ways. And she looks at her husband, and she's got like this clenched fist. And she looks at her husband, and he says, "Stop fighting." Mm. And she lets go of her hand, and she approaches like the first two enemies, this guy and this girl. And through kung fu, instead of like knocking them out, she somehow brings them together in a kiss. And they immediately fall in love. And the husband says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm learning to fight like you." And then she comes up to the next person, and she knows somehow that his back is out of alignment. And again, through kung fu, like puts his back into alignment. And he says, "Thank you." And he falls to the ground just like over and over. She's fighting with kindness and love and disarming like all of these people. And it was just like, oh, like I was talking to someone the other day who was asking me, it's like, how are you feeling like coming up to this like political season and stuff? It's like, are you like aggressively on like one side or the other, or like, are you disengaged? And I said, I am so non-confrontational and neutral. I can fit in just about anywhere. And like, that's who I am. And in that moment, like, especially the part where the guy says, "I know that you feel like a fighter. I'm a fighter too. This is how I fight," gave so much affirmation to me in that moment.
I am doing something too.
Because so much of my MO feels like surrender and compromise and like putting others first, but like viewing it in the form of like fighting, not in an aggressive, competitive sense, but like in the sense of like, I'm doing something.
Yeah.
Like this is very effective. And I don't know, I'm going to carry that with me.
I love that. I'm the opposite though. I'm having to bring myself down in this season. I don't know how you feel, but
I deleted all my social media.
Did you?
So yeah.
I'm going to have to be intentional about trying to be neutral, trying to be,
Well, so I just read a book this last week called Supercommunicators by Charles Duhigg.
Okay.
And in the book, he shares a story of this study that happened in Washington, D.C., where people were trying to figure out how do you bring people together kind of in these polarities. And so, of course, they picked probably one of the most controversial issues that people never typically agree on, gun stuff.
Oh, sure.
So they brought like NRA people with like gun right activists together, and they said, okay, so how do we get these people to actually sit down and to love each other and to listen to each other? And like, it was actually really fascinating the way it talked about it, but it had to do with this idea of how do you really begin to understand like the stories that shape people,
right,
and like upbringings and backgrounds, and it was fascinating. Like when they put all these people together at the end of it, like nobody changed their minds, but the way they saw one another, because usually when you think about people who are different, it's like, oh, they're dumb, they're idiots, they're whatever. It's like, well, no, they actually had like compassion for one another. And so you've got like the NRA guy who's actually compassionately loving and trying to engage this woman who had actually survived a school shooting herself. So I don't know. Like, I think some people can get that, but like when we're all triggered about stuff and we want to fight, we've got to.
right.
And this is totally not about that at all. But you said something about politics, and then you said something, and it made me think of that study. But it was fascinating. It was like, what happens if we just actually try to understand people? Like, forget the issue. Like, I don't care about the issue. Like, I want to understand you.
Yeah, I think there's in close proximity. If you are in close proximity to people, that compassion can abound, and grace can abound, and there's something about being able to see things clearly, and the burden actually gets heavier. If being able to see people for their hearts and them as a whole being compared to an action or a thought or a belief. Thinking about Jesus. I mean, like his plan to be incarnate, like to be in close proximity, for him being holy to transplant himself in close proximity to be being inside of a human being, so that compassion and grace can abound and he can become it. There's something in there.
Yeah, well, and thinking about what we talked about a couple weeks ago, this idea that like when you look at another person or you hug another person, like you're actually hugging a soul, you're seeing a soul. I think all that stuff gets a lot easier when we kind of have that framework that like, okay, you are so much more than what you believe or what you think or what tribe you identify with. Like you're a soul, and that's fundamentally more important than anything else about you.
It's good.
I started reading this book. It's called How to Know a Person by David Brooks. And I'm just like one chapter in, but he was talking about, it's like you can either be a diminisher or an illuminator when you encounter a person. Like diminishers, it's not necessarily like putting someone down or like making them feel like garbage or anything, but at least in your mind, you're diminishing them into like a box of like, yep, this is who this person is. Like they are Californian, and so like I have all these preconceived notions of like, yep, this is.
You do that when you
I feel insulted right now, Stetson.
When you see people's bumper stickers on their cars, you immediately,
Yeah, for sure. But then there's the illuminator, like the person who's like really curious about who the person actually is and doesn't operate out of preconceived notions, but almost has the goal of like illuminating the person for themselves to see themselves even clearer. And like I've seen this done both ways with like the Enneagram. Like if you're not familiar with the Enneagram, it's like a personality test, and it's a really helpful tool to like get to know yourself. But like the thing that I keep telling people is like, so on this test, I'm a 9, and people say, "Oh, you're such a 9." It's like, I'm not a 9. I'm Stetson. That's right. I am one of billions of people.
I'm surprised you're even bringing the Enneagram up because I know how you.
Right. Well, I am, because this totally affirms my thought. It's like I have been diminished by the Enneagram of like, you are a 9. Like you only exist within the parameters of this number, compared to using it as an illuminator of not even mentioning it, but just like having your understanding of that number and asking questions of someone based on like theories of like this personality test of like, are you feeling this way about this? And the person says, yes. Oh, I see myself so much clearly now. And so to what you're talking about, like made me think about this book, because like we could be a bunch of diminishers and like operate out of a bunch of preconceived notions, or we could go beyond just like the sense of like, okay, I'm going to have an open perspective of like, but what if we went so far as to believe we could play a part in helping someone understand themselves even better, not just us understand that person better.
I think too, that's the harder route. The easier route is to not have to be intentional with other people.
Yeah.
Like it's much easier to just have those thoughts, those, things going on, like diminishing them without them even knowing, but what are you losing when you're doing that?
And he listed off some reasons why we kind of like subconsciously default to diminishing. And I remember most of them, I think. Like one of them is fear. Like for some reason we're afraid of what this could be. Another one is like just social anxiety. Like we feel anxious, and so we're self-conscious about ourselves. So we're not, I don't know, we feel like we need to portray ourselves in a certain way. And so we're so focused on that, we can't like focus on another one. And another one is just kind of like a sense of egotism of like, oh, I'm definitely the smarter one here. It's like, if you believe in this or agree with this, I'm clearly the superior person.
So you're talking about like 95% of people.
Right. Exactly. And so it's just like helpful to have those things called out. I was like, oh yeah, I could see like a couple of those that I'm definitely guilty of from time to time. And it's interesting, those things being called out. It just allows you to be like, okay, if I put that aside, I am immediately feeling a lot more open.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really healthy framework. Lately, God's actually kind of been doing something in my own heart, just in the way that I interact with people. And the two kind of areas that I think God's been inviting me into, just as I approach people, as I talk with people, as I engage with people, is through the lens of critical or curious. So as I approach this relationship or this meeting or this experience, like, am I going through it with a critical lens of, well, let me pick it apart. Let me talk about why it's not so significant, or why that's dumb, or why that doesn't make sense, or why this way is better, versus which by the way, that's like my natural default. Like, you worked with me for years, and so did you. You guys know this about me. And it could be really helpful, and it could also really be pretty damaging, I think. But the thing I felt that God is inviting me into in this season, and we'll see how long it lasts, hopefully forever, but it's this curiosity. Like, when I step into a conversation, can I be curious? When I step into an environment, can I just be curious and try to understand what's happening? Try to understand the value, try to see the beauty in the moment. And I've found that as I've been doing this, and again, it's totally not natural to who I am, but I'm wanting to grow in it. It's brought me a lot more joy, right? You know, because criticism or that diminishing spirit, like, there's nothing good in that. Like it might feel good in the moment to go, oh yes, I'm so much better than that person who has those views. But like, at the end of the day, it does nothing good for us. It always leaves us feeling empty. It always leaves us feeling a little bit alone or broken or whatever, you know, it is for you. But when you're curious, well, then the whole world is open before you. Every relationship is open before you. Suddenly, you know, when you're interacting with someone who's very different than you, you don't step into that relationship going, oh, there's something I want to tear down. It's like, no, there's actually something I can learn here. Let me see the beauty. Let me see the good. Help me understand what's going on here. And it's been fun. And so I'm going to have to read that book. And it was funny. I actually just bought an Audible
nice.
like last week. So now I need to listen to it.
Yeah,
because I think it
listen to it with
can
me.
provide some language that could be really helpful. But I like that.
Yeah.
It's good. I've been in this space that I always have felt like the superpower I had has been observation, because I grew up and I couldn't talk, and so I was like this silent kid in the corner who paid attention to everything all the time, and
had plenty of thoughts.
and then I would come to understand people and culture and their whole thing, and something that Jenny just said earlier as a passing thought to the comment that Stetson said about the R film, she said, culture has changed. I, at that point, wanted to hit the button and say, okay, I want to unpack the culture changing, or is it being illuminated? But it's changing for us. I'm coming into a season of, I'm starting to see that the perceptions or experiences, this like superpower I had as a kid, it doesn't feel like a superpower anymore. It's almost this like, I saw things from the corner, and that's the only experience that I had. And so I'm starting to see that there are things I don't have the answers to. There are experiences I haven't had. There's people I don't understand, like fundamentally don't understand I think culture has gotten bigger. culture has gotten a voice that it hasn't had before. And I think it's easy to go into, I wouldn't even say the upcoming season, but the upcoming future
Yeah.
and be afraid of it because everything seems more vibrant.
Yeah.
I could say volatile or vibrant. I'm using the term
Great illuminator.
vibrant.
I like that.
Because it seems that the voices are different and they're voices I haven't heard before.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to interact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the question I have is, are there biblical contexts and examples that you all are able to think of to kind of help shape us going into the vibrant church future?
Yeah. So when you were talking about that, it made me think of this book, and it's an old book. It was written in the 1940s by this guy, Richard Niebuhr, called Christ and Culture. And maybe you read that when you were in seminary. But in this book, he proposes these different kind of frameworks for how the church typically approaches culture. So one is this idea of Christ against culture, right? Which is like, oh, the culture is evil, so we want to do everything we can to combat against it, right? So if it's a rated R movie, we don't watch that because that's not what good Christians do, right? That was that framework. There's the idea of Christ above culture, which is like, hey, Jesus is so far above culture, so we don't even pay attention to culture. There's Christ and culture in paradox, which is this idea that like whatever the culture does, we're going to go do the opposite of it. Which is where things like Christian music and Christian movies kind of were birthed out of. But then the one that he proposes is the one that I think is still pretty relevant. I mean, there's parts of his framework that maybe don't work today, but it's this idea of Christ transforming culture. And so it's like Jesus, you know, in the incarnation, he didn't go and live above the people. He went and he lived in the midst of people. And by doing so, he transformed those people that he lived with, right? The disciples, who then went on to transform the world, right? That Christ transforming culture, I think, is the paradigm that I want to look at and say, okay, how do I embody that?
That's good.
Right? How do we be the church who is in the middle of the culture, not necessarily being swayed by culture? So it's not like the culture is shaping the way that we understand church and Jesus, which I think is a danger that can happen when you live that way. But to really see ourselves as being planted here in the midst of our world, being planted in the midst of our city and saying, okay, Jesus, like, how do you want to change this? Because the truth is, Jesus loves our culture. He may not love certain things that happen within the culture, but the people who make up the culture, Jesus loves those people. Like, Jesus is not looking at anybody who is on our planet right now going like, I hate them, I just wish they would die. Right. I mean, there is evil, right? But like when you look at why Jesus came, he came to save evil people who are broken. Now that can mess with us, right? When you walk that out and you play with it, but it's like, man, like that is the gospel. And so, yeah, my framework is Christ transforming culture. I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of changing culture. And so seeing movies and being inspired by that, like, yeah, like I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think too, for what you were just saying, that there's a reason that we're in this time as well. You know, you look back at, you know, before we were born and the people that were there for that time and the purpose that they had in that time. And so it's kind of like, even though there are times, and I'll say that, I'll speak for myself, where you're just like, well, this is all hopeless. You know, it's going down. Like that's where my cynicism goes to. But it's like, what is the opportunity for me personally going into this vibrant future that I can grow and learn about myself? Not even be a part of everything that's going on or have a voice and all that, but what does it look like for me to be curious in how I can grow and change and be a better Jenny going forward in the future, as opposed to having a voice in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems like throughout Scripture, God is in favor of culture progressing and moving forward. Like, even in the early Old Testament, like the laws being written down were like super progressive to like what was happening around them, even though today they look like the opposite. It's like at that time, it was like, whoa, like, you let your slaves go every 7 years? Like, yep. Yeah. They're free after 7 years. And like Jesus, like coming into the scene, like over and over, it's like, you have heard it said, but I say. Yep. And like he's taking like the current understanding and progressing it forward. And I work in kids and youth ministry, and I think the generation coming forward that embodies to their core what you're talking about, KJ, like what we're seeing hints of, man, I think they are going to be the biggest gift
I think so
that our world has ever seen. I mean, you have and you have kids in that gen. It's like
we all have kids.
The way
in that generation.
They talk right now is beyond anything.
They are brilliant. They are, and you too, KJ. It's like they are loving. Like they embody the heart of Jesus, and they intuitively understand the kingdom come to earth more than any generation before them by far.
Yeah.
But to such a degree, they have thoughts that we haven't thought before, and they have perspectives that we haven't perceived before. Yes. And that's scary.
It's really scary. But I remember, KJ, you said something one time. You were talking about around Zion's birthday, and you said something that you're like, he has now come to a place where he will see things that I will never see. And it's not visual. It's like he has surpassed. There are things that I will never see that he can see. And I was like, wow, like you have to be okay with that.
So that's actually a perfect transition to the end here. So Zion, he's 17, and he has been on this journey that he's been very inspired by poetry, and so he himself has begun to practice doing poetry. And so he sent me this poem this morning before school, and I think that it embodies this whole conversation. I haven't asked him to share this, so don't tell him I shared it. It's just between us.
We might cut this part out.
Okay, so
actually, can he read it? I'm bad. I'm a bad reader.
So
Stetson's a really good reader of poetry.
He is a good reader. Choose your voice.
So Zion is 17. He sent this before school today.
Jesus waters the trees of heaven with a watering can full of tears. The tears of the people who put their heart in his hand fall in unison to the sound of rain. They fill up his watering can so quickly that he has endless supply for the trees. These trees' roots dig deep and grasp the soul of heaven. We could never understand. God has not once ignored our cries for help. He has kept every single one of our tears and stashed them in the roots of heaven to make paradise that much more beautiful.
Dude,
Thank you,
that is so beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Man.
And thank you, Zion. All right, we will see you guys next time.